All right, let's move on to our workshop now. So, can everyone go and navigate to your catbook React folder? So you can go. So what you would want to do is you want to go to your catbook React repository. If you need help, you can ask any of our TAs. We're going to be using this for our workshop today on JavaScript. And although we're not going to be making a website, we're going to be using the catbook React repository, like as if we were, just for just so that like it's easier for everyone to stay on track. Okay. So all right. So let's get started. So our goal with this project is to build something with Scratch using just JavaScript. So like specifically, we're going to be building a simple game called Snake, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. So let me do a quick demo before we get started. All right. Sure. So this is just a simple JavaScript app for Snake that we're going to be making today. And like the objective of the game is you have this little green snake running around your board, and it's trying to eat apples. And so every time it eats an apple, it grows one in length. And you know, like the trouble with this game is that like you don't want to run into yourself. So like I ran into myself there, and then I died. And then another thing is like if you run into a wall, you're also going to die. And so just trying to get your snake as long as you can. So, all right. So I'm sure this game is really simple to understand. So let's talk a bit how we're going to do this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to, from like a high level, we're going to like have this board, which is going to have our snake. And then after like regular short intervals, we're going to like be updating our snake's position, drawing where the snake is on the board, and like checking various things. So like at every iteration, we're going to check if we need to update the apple's position or if the snake has died. So this is what we're going to be making. We're going to be doing it all in JavaScript, and there's going to be lots of coding. There's going to be a lot of practice for the JavaScript that we just learned in today's class. And we're going to have steps like in yesterday's workshop. So like, don't worry if you get stuck, you will have like a chance to catch up. And so mostly for this workshop, you're just going to be following along, like trying to code with me as we implement this app. All right, there's a demo. Great. So again, what are the things that we're going to be needing for making this app here for this snake game? First thing is we're going to need to like have a game set up, which means like, you know, the board, the styles, all the starter, and like all of this is going to be provided in the starter code. And then we also need to have the snake itself, which we need to have like a representation for the snake. We need to have a way for it to move around the board, stuff like that. We're also going to need the snake to be able to respond to inputs. So we're going to have to handle keyboard inputs. And then we're also going to have to take care of food objects. So we're going to want the food objects to spawn at random points. And then we're also going to need to have logic for what happens when the food is eaten. All right, and we also are going to want to have logic for game termination. So when the snake dies, we need to handle how that would work. Great. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cd into your catbook React folder. If I do pwd, as you can see, I have already cd'd into here. And then you're going to want to run git fetch. Let me make this bigger so easier to see. Oops. Okay. So you're going to want to, you see this? All right. And then you're going to run git reset hard, and then git checkout w1-starter. Okay. And then you're going to want to open VS Code in this folder. You can do that either shortcut code space period if you've configured that to work. Otherwise, you can just open it the regular way. Okay. So I will get started on the code. Don't worry if you haven't caught up yet. I'm just going to be talking about our code to begin with. So you'll see in our CAD Direct folder here, we now have 3 files. We have game.js, index.html, and style.css. So the first thing I'm going to touch upon is index.html. And this is just like a really basic HTML file. The important thing is this line here, div with a game board. And this is going to be holding our game board. So if you look at our website here, our actual page, and you can access this by just taking index.html in your VS Code here, and you can just drag it onto your browser. And this will just create a copy of your Snake game. It's as simple as that. So just taking this and dragging it onto your browser. And then now you can actually see your Snake game. And to begin with, what we actually see here is relatively simple. We just see our div, our game board div here, which is a 21 by 21 grid. And we're going to be redrawing this at every update step. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But so we have our index.html file. We're not going to be working with that today, so we can go ahead and close it. And then I'll walk through style first. Style is just a predefined set of styles for our game here. And it just has like styles for our snake, which is green, and food, which is red, stuff like that. It's not very important as well, but we can go ahead and close it. So we're going to be working with game.js to begin with. And you can see there's a bit of starter code here already done for me, done for us. And the first thing you'll see is that we have a main function. And what this main function is doing is it's calling update and draw, which haven't been implemented yet, but we will be implementing them throughout this time. And we also have this, you might have never seen this before, it's set interval. And what this does is it just goes ahead and it will repeatedly run our main loop. It'll just run it, it'll just call it as often as it can. And so that's going to be like our main game loop for running this game here. So if we go back to our, so what we can do now is just to see this working, we can go to update, and then we can add the line console.log updating. And then we can go ahead and save it. And what's happening now is if we refresh our page and we go to console, we can see that it's printing out updating really quickly, like hundreds of times per second. So this is going to be like how often we're going to be calling this is just how often the main game loop is running. And this is like this is being run way too quickly because it's running so many times per second. Like the snake is going to just run off the board immediately. And so we want to like kind of slow it down and make it something more manageable. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go to set interval. And then we're going to change this to be 1,000 divided by 5. And what this means is the second argument to set interval is telling JavaScript how often you are going to be running this loop here. And the way that this works is 1,000 being, this is measured in like milliseconds. So it's going to be run every this many milliseconds. So there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. And then I'm dividing it by 5. So we're going to be running our main game loop every 5 times per second. So if I save this now and I refresh, you probably see that updating is updating much more slowly, only exactly 5 times a second. It's very manageable. And this is going to be our game loop for this is going to be the speed that we're going to run our snake game at. All right. And so, for example, if I change this one from divided by 5 to just being divided by 1, it should instead only update the game once every second. And you'll see that this number is incrementing at a very slow speed now. Similar thing goes for if we wanted to change this one to 20, refresh, it'll be updating 20 times a second now. Cool. But for today's stuff, we're just going to be using number 5. And one thing to note is that, oh yeah, sure, sorry. Easier to see now? All right. So we have this number 5 here, which is kind of like out there in the wild. We kind of want to assign it to a variable because it's just kind of hidden in our code right now, and that's not necessarily good coding practices. Let's go ahead and just make this a variable called snake speed. And then we can define snake speed at the top of our code here. So const snake speed equals 5. So we just move the 5 up to the top, and we have it as a const variable now. And this is generally good practice because now we can easily find where the game speed is running at, and we can change it really easily instead of having to search through our code. All right, great. So now we've finished setting up our game. So we have our main game loop here. So main game loop. And it's running 5 times a second, which is pretty nice speed. And don't worry if you haven't fully caught up right now. What we're going to do now is have everyone go ahead and run. We're going to have everyone go ahead and run git reset hard, git reset -- hard, and then git checkout w1 - step 1. And unlike in previous, like yesterday's workshop, I'm going to ask everyone to update to run these 2 lines here, even if you've fully caught up. And the reason for that is that I'm going to be adding in a bit of steps between these steps that you don't have to do. And for example, now if we go back to our cat.react directory, we can see that there's a brand new file here. And it's called snake.js. So we can go ahead and open it. Okay. And you'll see we have this code here. So right now we don't have to touch this one, but everything about the snake is going to be housed in the snake.js file. And so the first thing that we can do is the snake speed kind of relates to our snake. So let's go ahead and move that variable into snake.js. So I'm just removing snake speed from game.js and I'm moving it to snake.js. Pretty good. And then now what else does our snake, what else should our snake file have? And we're probably going to want to have a body, a representation of the snake body. And the way that we're going to do it today is we're going to have a rep, we're going to rep it as a list of coordinates. So we can do const snake body, body equals, and then we can do a list of coordinates. Let's just do x is equal to 11, and y is equal to 11 as well. And then let's just have a few segments. So the snake is we know where the snake is pointing, and right. And so we're just kind of like initializing our snake to be in the middle of the screen. If I forgot to mention this earlier, but our board is going to be a 21 by 21 board. So that's why 11 is right in the middle here. And great. So like this is going to be our representation for our snake body. And it's as it is like a list of coordinates, the very first one, so the one at the 0th index, that's going to be the head of our snake. We're just going to arbitrarily assign that to be our head. And the one at the end is going to be the tail of our snake. And everything in the middle is just the middle segments of our snake. Great. Now, cool. So now we're going to want to create a way to update our snake at every iteration of the main game loop. And the way that we can do that is we can create a update snake function. And it's going to just take in, like no arguments, which is fine. So we have this function update snake now that we're going to want to be adding to. And from like a higher level, we can think of it as that, like the first thing that we're going to want to do with so update snake it's pretty much just moving snake to the next position. And so the way that we're going to do that is the first thing you want to do is you want to like remove the tail segment. So you can just delete it. You also want to like move like the head segment. So in other words, you can like add a new head segment. And so like these are like the two steps that we're going to be needing to take. So if you recall from the lecture just now, it's really easy to just remove the last element from snake body, and we can do that via just doing snake body dot pop. And so this will just remove the very last element from snake body every time we need to update. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we want to create a new head segment. All right, so the easiest way to go about this is probably to first create a copy of the first element, like the old head. Let's just call it new head equals, and then we can copy it with the spread operator. And then we're going to do snake body, and then the first element in it. So what's happening here is that I'm just taking the first position, the first where the head is right now. I'm just creating a copy of it. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to do new head dot x. I'm going to plus equals some value. Let's just say 0 for now. The new head dot y plus equals 1. And so now I've pretty much just said it's like the new head is just the old head, but its y position is +1. Yeah. Which concept are you talking about? Okay, yeah. So, right, I mentioned that like snake body, because it's pointing to an array, it's actually just an object reference. So the reference itself is not changing, even though the object it's pointing to is changing. Great. All right. Right. So now that we've created a new head element, we want to add it to our snake body. So the way that we can do this is with another built-in array function. And we haven't seen this before, so you're kind of just going to have to trust me that it does what I say it does. And then we're going to do snake body.unshift. And this might sound weird, but all that this function unshift does, if we highlight over it, we can see it inserts new elements at the start of an array. So it's kind of like the opposite of pop in that it's just adding to the beginning of our array. And so I'm just putting our new head element at the very beginning of our array. So that's what that does there. All right, so now we have our snake that's able to update at every step. And so let's go back to game.js, and we have to do one thing real quick. We have to add the line update snake. So we have to call our update snake function every time we're updating our game. And well, this makes sense because if we don't call it in our main update function, then we're just like we just wrote this function pretty much and nothing's going to happen. So we're calling it here and it's just telling the game to update the position of the snake at every iteration of the main game loop. And so you might also see that I've written a function for you already called drawSnake at the bottom of the screen. And you don't have to change this. I'm just going to walk through like what it does. But like I wrote it for you just in the interest of time. And what it does is it's pretty much just going through every element of the snake body, and then it's just going ahead and finding the corresponding position in the game board here. And then it's just going to like it's going to create a new div and it's going to assign the classes that are associated with making that box the correct color, stuff like that. And it's just going to add it to our HTML. And you don't really have to worry about that because you're not really going to use this format later on. I'm just explaining what the drawSnake function does here. Great. So now our code should look like this. And now if we go back to our snake game, if we refresh our page now, you can see that we actually have a snake that's moving along the page. That's pretty good. So every time we refresh, you can see that the snake is moving down. But like one thing that you might notice is that we have like kind of like preset the snake's direction to be going in the plus Y direction. So every time we're setting the head to be +1 of the old one in the Y direction. But if you look at our page here, it's just going down. And the reason for that is the way that like plus X and plus Y work in like HTML is like along your row, the positive direction is to the right, which makes sense. So like that's like your plus X direction. But the plus Y direction is pointing downwards. And the reason for that is like, it's kind of like how you would read a book where like line numbers are increasing when you're going down. So this is just something to remember in like HTML, web development in general, that your lines are going to be, your Ys are going to be pointing downwards. And so you just have to keep that in mind as we go along. All right. And another issue that you might notice with our game here is that our snake is just going down and it doesn't stop when it reaches the wall, but we're going to deal with that later. Right now, all we're focusing on is just trying to get a snake that moves. And we've done that. I think that's a good amount of progress for now. Let's see. Don't worry if you haven't caught up yet. You can just, we can go ahead and we can go back and we can do git reset -- hard to move on to the next step. And then git checkout w1 step 2. And our code should look exactly the same. But yeah. So actually the time is now like 12:27. I think we can go ahead and take a break for lunch. So I'll see you back in about half an hour then.
Hi, Albert.
Hi, Vincent.
Hi, Albert.
Hi, Alan.
Nice.
Nice. All right. So let's get back to it. Before that, let's do like a couple side things. First off, if you look around you, we have a few staff that's going to be like walking up and down the aisles. Can you guys raise your hands? So if you ever need help, you can just like feel free to reach out to the nearest staff member to you. Also, it's like come to our attention that a bunch of people have not like cloned the Git repository. So if you haven't done that, you can just go to weblab.to/catbook right there. And this is the same repository that we're going to be using for all workshops. So make sure you have this cloned. And if you need help doing that, you can ask a staff member. And if you need help, you can feel free to use the queue at weblab.to/queue. And if you should also ask questions, or if you need questions, you can ask them at weblab.to/questions. And if that doc is full, you can go to the overflow one at /questions-overflow. All right, great. So for the people who have just cloned the workshop, all you have to do is in your terminal, you have to go to the directory that Catbook React is stored in. And then to catch up to us here, you just have to run these two commands here. You have to make sure you run git reset --hard. And just in case, can everyone go ahead and do this? Run git reset --hard, and then git checkout w1-step2, like this here. If you've already done it, you're good then. And I will have this here. If you get lost, these are the commands at the bottom here. Don't forget, like in case you forget what they are, they're right there. And all right. Great. All right, so let's get started here. If you recall, from the last thing that we did was we were able to get our snake to start moving downwards. And so the snake is just like kind of hard coded to go downwards right now, which is where we did this right here. And so the next thing that we want to do is we want to allow keyboard inputs so that the user can decide where the snake moves. And so if we're in Catbook here, if we're in VS Code, you can see on the left, when we checked out the new step, there's another file that's created called input.js. And let's go ahead and open this right now. And you'll see that it's an empty file right now. And we're going to go and fill this in. So this file is going to contain like all of the logic for controlling which direction the snake is going to move in. And so let's go ahead and do that. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to have a variable that stores which direction the snake is moving in. And the easiest way to do that is I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it input direction. And I'm going to initialize this to be x is equal to 0 and y is equal to 1. So what this means is that the snake is initially moving in the plus y direction. And this is how we're going to define it. So great. All right, and then the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want a function that is going to allow the snake to get the current input direction. And so this is going to be like a really simple function. We're just going to call it get input direction. And then this is just going to be a function with no arguments. And then all it's really going to do is it's just going to return input direction. And so we're making this function here so that when the snake wants to get like the current input direction, all it has to do is call this one. It doesn't, like it's good practice generally to not have variables and other files be directly accessed by code in a different file. So we're going to have it go through this function here. All right. So now we're going to get into like the meat of this step. And now we're going to want to create a way for us to actually take in keyboard inputs. And the way that we do that is we first write down window.add event listener. So what this does is, first of all, window is a kind of a object that like holds your entire website. So window is just saying like we're adding something that will listen for events. And what that means is, let me first write down key down. So this denotes like the type of event that we're going to be listening for, key down being a key press. And then what window.add event listener does is also takes in a callback function. which has the input event. And what this does is event is like a function that will, or this callback function here will take in a keyboard event and then which will be stored in this event variable, which will have information about like which keyboard or which key was pressed and stuff like that. For our use here, we're just going to be checking if the pressed key was one that we're interested in. And the ones that we're interested in, for example, first we're going to be interested in the arrow up key. And the way that we will check if that's the case is we can just simply do if event.key is equal to arrow up. So what this does is it checks if the key pressed was the up arrow, and if so, then we're going to want to do something. In this case, we're going to want to set input direction to the up direction. And if you'll recall, x is equal to 0, that makes sense, but the up direction is actually the negative y direction. So we're going to have y is equal to -1 here. You'll recall that like the y directions were flipped, so plus y is actually down here. And then once we've done this for arrow up, this is what we need here. We can do simply like a pattern matching for the rest of the arrow keys here. So let's just go ahead and do arrow down, and we can just simply have this one be y is equal to +1. And we can go ahead and copy this a couple more times to get the ones for arrow left and arrow right. And we just have to change these to be arrow left would be -1, so it would be 1, 0. Does this all make sense? So essentially what's happening here is that we're adding an event listener for key presses, and then applying a key press, we're checking if the key press was the up arrow, down, left, or right. And if so, we're going to update the direction of our snake to be the one that we're interested in. And we do that by changing input direction, which will be stored here, or it would be able to be gotten here. Okay, all right. Yeah, so let's move on to the next step. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to go back to snake.js. And then you'll recall that like we have these values for the new direction like hard coded in. And now we're going to be able to go ahead and have these be like, you know, the one corresponding to the keyboard input. So the way to do that is we can create a variable called snake direction. We're going to set it equal to get input direction. And we're going to call it. So what this is doing here is it's taking the get input direction function from input.js, which should return the most recent keyboard input. And then it'll set that to our variable snake direction in snake.js. And then we can simply just have snake. When we're updating the position of the head, we can just add on snake direction.x and snake direction.y. And so what this will do is this allows us to go ahead and take in the keyboard input direction and then update our new head with that input value. Great. So wait a bit for people to catch up. If anyone needs a bit more time, can you like raise your hand to catch up? Okay. All right. All right. Hopefully that was enough time. So now what we can go ahead and do is we can go back to our browser, and then we can try seeing what happens now. So as you can see now, we're able to move our snake around. And it's moving around pretty nicely, but one thing that you might notice is that there's a bit of an issue, and it's that, well, sure many of you can see it right now. Our snake can kind of do a 180-degree turn, and this is pretty unideal because, you know, in snake, you'd expect your snake to only be able to move at a 90-degree turn. Like, you expect it to only turn 90 degrees. So how are we going to fix this? Right. So let's go back to our code now and go to input.js. And the way that we're going to deal with this is that, well, if we think about it, to prevent our snake from making 180-degree turns, we just need to check that our new input direction, like our new snake direction, is at 90 degrees to our previous direction. So that kind of like tells us the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to store the previous input direction. So let's go ahead and do that. We can create a variable called last input direction. And we're just going to also initialize it to this here. And so now all we have to do is we have to update this every time we're getting a new input direction. So we can just do last input direction equals input direction here. And so this is just making sure that last input direction is actually always the previous one that we had. And then, so to prevent, like to actually get the logic in for preventing us from making 180-degree turns, we can just make the check that we just want to ensure that if we want to go up next, we want to make sure that we weren't going down or up beforehand, right? We want to make sure that we're actually going left or right. So the way to do that is we can go ahead and we can change our if statement to have a second check. And this check will be like, we have to check like if last input direction is like, if its y direction is equal to 0. And what this means is like, we're just checking if we want to go up, we just want to make sure that we weren't going up or down beforehand. And if we're going up or down, then y would be equal to -1 or 1. So we're just checking that we're going left or right beforehand in order to turn up. Oops. And then the same thing will happen for arrow down. We want to make sure that we're going in the direction perpendicular to where we want to go, which is left or right. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of them, except we want to change these for left and right. We want to change these to X. So this ensures like once we make this change, we're like ensuring that our snake will not make 180-degree turns. And I can go ahead and just run this in our snake game again. And you can see that we're no longer able to do like 180-degree turns. You can go ahead and run this in your own as well. Just in case you missed it the first time, to be able to run the snake game in your own browser, all you have to do is go here and then just take index.html and you drag it to your browser. And then that'll open up the snake game. So, all right. So that's some pretty good progress here. Don't worry if you haven't been able to write out all of these. What we're going to do now is if everyone could go back to your console or your terminal, and then you can go ahead and run git reset --hard. And can everyone go ahead and go to their terminal and run this or command line? And then go ahead and run git checkout w1-step 3. So all right. So this should get everyone up to date. And you might also see like there's some work that happened behind the scenes, namely that we've created a new file, food.js. So yeah, go ahead and run git reset --hard and then git checkout w1-step 3. Okay. So if you look at our snake game right now, we have our snake running around, and don't worry about the errors that we're seeing on the right now. They're not doing anything. But we have our snake running around. What we're missing is we're still missing like food and the logic for food, as well as like checking when the game is over. But let's work on food first. So let's go ahead and go to our VS Code and open up the food file. And you'll see like there's a bit of starter code as well for drawing the food. Okay, so let's go ahead and start working on this. So how can we represent the food object? This is going to be kind of similar to how we represented our snake body, and we can just represent the position of the food as a coordinate. So let's go ahead and create a variable to denote the position of where the food is. So we can just simply do like x is equal to like 4 and y is 16, for example. So what this does is it puts the food at position 4 and 16. And right. And then let's see what happens. So when we're playing the game, we also want to have a function called update food. And what this does is this is also going to be called like pretty much at the same time as update snake. And it's just going to check if the snake is eating the food right now. And if so, then we're going to want to move the food to a new position and also increase the length of the snake. So let's write a bit about what the body should look like. So we can kind of go ahead and just write like, so if on snake, and then we'll pass in food. So what this does is on snake is like a function that doesn't yet exist. We're just like kind of punting the actual work of coding it so we can stay at a high level and see what we actually have to do for updating food. So first thing we check is if the snake is currently eating the food, then what we have to do is we want to first grow snake. And then again, I'm just punting this work to the future. I'm just keeping at a high level of what we have to do. And so we have to grow the snake and we also have to move the food. So let's just say food is equal to get new food position. And so, all right, so we've done this right now. And what's kind of happened is that food is like, we have 3 functions that will let us have all the logic that we need for our food. And we just punted this off into the future. So let's go ahead and just check if we can comment this out real quick. You don't have to follow along here. Let's just see that food is being properly displayed. And you can see that it's right there. It's being displayed. But if we run over it, nothing happens. And so that's why we needed to add these 3 functions here. Okay, so let me go ahead and uncomment these. All right, so I'm gonna so now we just in order to finish this food feature of our game, you just have to write these 3 functions, right? So I'm gonna take this as an opportunity to talk about collaboration. So so far the nature of the work that we've done for the snake game has been just done by ourselves. We've coded everything up solo, and there's only one thread of progress. But when you're going to be working on your project as a team, you're going to be want to collaborate on your work. And so specifically, you're going to be wanting to work in parallel with your teammates, oftentimes on code that will depend on what your teammates work. So these 3 functions that we need to be implemented, we can use these as an opportunity to explain how this might work. So what might happen here is you have these 3 functions that you have to write, but then you say to yourself I'm too lazy to write these functions, or I don't know how to actually write these functions. So what do you do then? So then you go over to your teammate, say his name is Johnny or something, right? And you say hey Johnny, a good teammate, excellent friend, right? Can you come over here, do me a tiny favor, just a good one, right? And can you come over here and implement these 3 functions for me? So and then Johnny's he's a good guy, right? And then he comes along and he's of course I'll help you out, anything for my good friend. So then what happens is you go ahead and you add and commit, and then you push your changes. And so then Johnny can like hop on your branch and see like the work that you've done so far. And then what you have to do is you proceed to tell Johnny like what functions you want him to write. So in this case, on snake, grow snake, and get new food position, these three. And then you tell them like how you want these functions to behave. And then so like in industry we'd say like call this process giving Johnny the spec for your function. And like so like now Johnny's like free to implement these three functions like however he likes, as long as like his code satisfies the spec. And like normally in this industry, this would involve like writing documentation and tests and all sorts of stuff like that. But we're just going to pretend like Johnny has a perfect understanding of what you have to write for him. So now that Johnny's off, like implementing these functions for you, you're free to go off and like continue working on your code elsewhere. You're free to go on working on other stuff. You're also free to continue working on this project here, as if like these three functions were already implemented. So like in other words, you're continuing onwards with the assumption that these three functions were already available to you. So in that way, like you're able to keep doing work, and Johnny is also able to do work on the same project as you. And you're like able to work in parallel on stuff that's dependent on each other. So for the sake of like this lecture today, we're just gonna, or for the workshop, we're just gonna assume that Johnny works like super fast, and he's already finished implementing all these functions, and he's also pushed these changes already. So what happens then is you can just go ahead and you do a git pull, and then like voila, your desired functions are there. But in this workshop, however, we're just gonna do this by going to our console. And can everyone follow along here? You can just go ahead and just do git reset -- hard again. And then, oops, and then you can go ahead and git checkout w1 - step 4. Okay. All right. Can we have a thumbs up if everyone's caught up? Anyone not caught up? Just git reset -- hard, and then git checkout w1 - step 4. All right. So now let's look at our code here. Let's go back to our code, and then we'll see like if you look at the files on the left again, we'll see that there's a new file that got created when Johnny pushed his changes. So let's open it up. It's called snakeutils.js. And then so this is like the function where Johnny did all of his work. So we can see that the functions that we wanted him to write, like on snake, grow snake, and get new food position are all here, as well as like these two other functions, equal positions and random grid position. Like we don't really have to worry about exactly how he did it, but these functions are probably just, they're helper functions, right? Equal positions is useful for checking if a position is on the snake, and random grid position is useful for getting a new food position. All right, so we have all this done now, and now we can go ahead and go back to our snake game, and everyone can do this here. You can just refresh now, and you'll see that because Johnny wrote all those functions for us, and they all work, you're able to have a snake that now grows every time you eat food, and the food position will actually update every time you eat one. All right. Oops. Whoa. There's like bugs when you run into the edge of the game, and well, because like the game would normally end if that happens, then we don't actually have to worry about these bugs. So, all right. So now we're seeing that all the food eating process is all good, but now the only thing that we're missing from our actual game is the steps for game termination. So let's go ahead and go back to game.js, and let's now go through like what happens when the game is over. So the easiest way to handle all the logic for like game termination when the game should end is let's just create a variable called game over, and we can initialize it to being false. So what this means is while the game is still happening, game is over is obviously false. So as soon as the game ends, meaning like the snake runs into itself or the snake runs into a border, we're going to want to update the game over variable to being true. Okay, great. So let's see what happens when the game ends, right? Let's go to our main loop. Let's just see what happens. So if say like game over, then we're going to want to do a few things, right? The first thing is what we're going to want to do is I'm just going to use a function that I told us about during the lecture, which is alert. And what this is just going to do is it's just going to create a pop-up on the Chrome on the window that's going to say like game is over. And there's that. Then another thing that we're going to want to do is that when game over is true, we're also going to want to end the main loop. We're also going to want to stop running it. Because right now, what set interval is doing is that it's like repeatedly running the game loop. And we just want to tell set interval to stop running the game loop. So the way that we can do this is, first of all, we're going to want to set a variable to be equal to like the set interval object. So let's just go ahead and do like const game loop is equal to the set interval object here. And the reason I'm assigning this set interval object to a variable is that what it lets me do is it lets me use this other function, clear interval. And then we pass in the game loop that we want to clear. And what this does is once clear interval is called on game loop, it tells the game loop, like it tells it to stop running the main function. All right. So great, now we kind of like have the logic for what happens when the game is over. So we just want to do, if the game is over, then we're going to tell the user that the game is ended, and we're also going to want to stop the main game loop. All right. So now what's missing is we want to be able to know when actually game is over. We want to be able to update game over every time we run the loop. So the way that we can do this is let's just go over to our update function here. And then we can run, and then we can just do game over is equal to a new function is game over. And so what's happening here is that every time we're running the game loop once, we're going to check after we update the snake and the food, is the game over? Is the snake has the snake reached the edge of the screen or has it bit itself? And then we're going to assign, and then we're going to take the value, like we're going to see if the game is over and we're going to update game over with it. Yes. And again, I'm just writing down this function as if it already exists. I'm punting this work into the future, just so I can keep a high level view of what we're actually doing here. All right. And so now that I've gone all the logic around checking the game is over, I actually have to write the function is game over now. So let's go ahead and implement it. And we can do it right here. And all we have to do is we have to write const is game over and set this equal to a function. So this is going to be the function that will check if the game is over. All right. So again, I'm going to punt the work into the future, and I'm going to just write return snake out bounds or snake intersect self. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling myself there's two ways for the game to end. It's if the snake has run out of bounds, if it's hit the border, or, and these two bars here, that means it's like a Boolean or. So if either of these functions evaluate to true, then it'll return true. If it'll return false, only if they are both false. And then I've also created this function I've also defined this function called snake intersect self. And so that's just going to check if the snake is on top of itself, if it's like biting its own tail, for example, right? And so these are the two cases that we need to consider. And again, I'm punting the work into the future. I don't want to, like say, I don't want to write these right now. I just want to keep the high level view of what I need to actually do to check before the game to be over. And again, like we're kind of feeling lazy, and remember that Johnny did such a good job last time, right? So, we're going to ask him to write snake out of bounds and snake intersect self again for us. He's going to do it for us. And so we go ahead and we tell them how we want these functions to behave. They're going to like look at the snake. They're going to see if it's out of bounds. They're going to check all of that for us. And we tell Johnny to write this, and he's a great guy. So what he does is he goes ahead and he works super fast, and he pushes it all, and it's all ready for us. We just have to pull it. So we're going to go ahead and go back into our terminal, and we're going to do git reset -- hard again. Yeah, and then we're going to do git checkout w1 - complete. So everyone could go ahead and run these two functions, or run these two lines. All right, great. So hopefully everyone's caught up here. And all right, and then now that we have Johnny's changes, we can go back to his file snake utils, and we can see like what are the things that he's added so far. So just now he's added these 3 functions to his code. He's added snake out of bounds and snake intersect self like we wanted him to. And so like these are just the 2 functions that are going to check if the snake has done something wrong. The snake should die. And now that he's done these for us, we should be able to actually go back to our browser and then run the game again. And we can see now that we have like all the parts that we needed. The only thing that we're missing before this was checking if the snake would die if it runs into itself. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we get the message that the game has ended every time when we run into the edge. We can also go ahead and run into the edge, like the border, and the game will also say that the game is over. So yeah. All right, so that's like all of the content for this workshop today. Just for like a quick recap, JavaScript is like the logic handling programming language of our websites. So whenever you want like interactivity, like whether it be hitting buttons, making the web page have interactive pop-ups, or like getting data from the server, JavaScript is what you're going to use to do it. And like you'll be seeing like and using a lot of this syntax again in like the near future. And like it's totally okay if like you don't understand it completely right now, since understanding all this will come with like a lot of time and practice. But hopefully like this was a good first dive into JavaScript, and like you learned a lot and had fun making an actual working game here. And yeah, that's it for today. If there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Yeah. Yeah, you can just refresh. Oh yeah, definitely. The way that you would do that is you'd probably, every time you press OK, you should be able to, your code should wait for the user to press OK. And then you would probably want to reset like snake body to like some initial state, maybe this one again. And then you're going to also want to reset like game over to being false. And then once you've done that, you should be able to start over. Yeah, so all the code is like available for you if you ever want to see this again. All you have to do is go to your cat book React and then check out w1 - complete. And with that, I think that's all I had for today. All right, thank you guys.